The International Monetary Fund has waded into the current Naira scarcity in Nigeria by calling on the federal government and the Central Bank of Nigeria to extend the cash swap policy deadline beyond February 10. The International Monetary Institution, which is the first global body to openly call for an extension of the cash swap policy, made the call shortly after the Supreme Court gave a ruling temporarily restraining the federal government and the CBN from enforcing the deadline. We now have Mr. Sam Amadi with us right in the studio to discuss this and sundry issues with us on Newsnight. Now, this cash swap policy has gone on for so long, and now International Monetary Fund is wading in. So what should we expect in the coming days?
Well, I think the problem is that the politics is probably crowding out or suffocating the economics and the strategic focus.
That's obvious.
Yes. So clearly, the return date for the court is going to be on, I think, on the 15th, which is a couple of days from now.
Wednesday.
On Wednesday, several states have applied to join. The Governors Forum met that today also, issued a statement, strong communique, also kind of attacking the central bank and observing that although the Attorney General has said we will comply, and of course the right thing to do is to always comply with the order of court. Yeah. But the authorities that there's no change in status quo in terms of cash, getting back, increasing the cash in circulation. Now, if you look at what CBN has done, it's about the cash ratio to cash, money supply and cash circulation is about 0.58%, which is very drastic. We used to have about 3%. Countries like the US has about 10% if you look at money supply and cash in circulation. So what they've done already is that they have mopped up so many cash a lot. Now, two things. First is, yes, we can obey the Supreme Court order, but the question is, are you going to, will the central bank release a lot more cash, like Governor Rufai and the governors are saying, back to the system? If they do, how does that line up with their strategic objective, which in the short term is to reduce possibility of vote buying? Now, many people have said, oh, the politicians are not suffering. Other people are suffering. They're looking at just, okay, even if the little cash available, the big guys, because Nigeria is a prebendalist neo-patrimonial state. It means that even if only 2,000 is existing, the big guys can take 1.9 and leave just 0.1 for the commoners. So the logic is you aim at getting at these big guys, politicians, but you are actually hitting at the poor people. And that's what informed IMF intervention. Say, look, to avoid too much crisis, if the cash crunch gets to a point where people are no longer able to have access to funds and transact, it could actually hurt the economy if it gets too bad. I mean, you see a drastic shrinkage in consumption. In the positive way, it can constrain inflationary pressure. People are not consuming, and money supply is low, and therefore, prices may not, or it is very equal. But again, it can also cause other economic crisis in the sense that people are not also consuming. We see in the Abeokuta some flare of demonstration. So if you have, God forbid, some kind of organized chaos in a way that it could both damage the macroeconomy, affect investment, even the long term, and like IMF hinted, could lead to serious crisis of the banking sector, confidence in the financial sector. But the answer is not for central bank to totally undo its policy objective. It is to find a way to calibrate intervention in a way that maybe they release some more money into the system, but never to the point where we are. Because look, if you get back to putting out this 2.something trillion, they have been able to mop up back to the system, then you are going to create a real market for vote buying at the eve, so to say, of a very important election. But at the same time, if you don't, it's like walking through a trapeze, a fine line. You have to ensure that the cash crunch does not deteriorate to a point where you see more of those crises, and where you now begin to affect drastically human well-being in terms of access to money for daily
standard
of living, in terms of even lost man hour people spend. You have to factor the costs
staying
of
on the queues,
for
barely coming out,
leaving the office, and some people maybe not even going to work. So all these, social economic impact at the retail level has to be put in one ledger, and then you ask yourself, okay, this objective, how much are we achieving it? How much are we compromising it? Now, the Council of State's position is more sensible. They support the policy, but they're asking the central bank to try to take action to deal with these obvious,
Yeah, and they're suggesting as well that both old and new currency allowed to work hand in hand, even though we're still seeing a lot of people.
But central bank says, look, we can get back, we can cash back. So the central bank allows them to take it back, but they can't allow it to circulate. Otherwise, the whole policy.
I hear you on that, but at the end of the day, let's not forget. Let's cast our mind back as to why this policy was introduced in the first place. The CBN had actually alleged that 80% of the cash that was printed was not in the banking system, and of course had its own implications. And beyond that, they said this would help with the inflation, which is over 20% as it stands right now, amongst other security implications. Even now, they are alleging that kidnapping and other vices have actually reduced drastically. But at the end of the day, while we're gaining on this front, what we're losing, some would say, might be more. So, how do we walk our way from here in a way where we don't undo all the CBN has achieved with over close to 3 trillion coming back into the banking system as against less than 1.5 trillion earlier before this policy. So how do we achieve, the objective of this policy without necessarily undermining the security of the Nigerian life? I know I don't get what I mean by that.
I think, and that's the point where we should deference to central bank. Okay, if I was a court and if I was the governors, I would argue that CBN should be in the best position to look at the situation and find appropriate tools that can address it. So first, the central bank can decide to extend, okay? But that what I object to is a politically motivated and politically decreed action. Now, integrity of the system is important, and what that means that all this should be a decision for the central bank through its institutionalized means of decision making. Feedback from the system, from the banking sector, from the customer. They have their experts going around, doing some audit and finding out. Now, if there's need to extend, number one, if there's need also to increase the amount of money the central bank shoots out, 300 billion, they said so far, they could do more. If I look at, like I said, 0.58 percentage is a drastic crunch.
Absolutely, yeah.
But like you pointed out, there's a strategy. First, they've shown that inflation is going down slightly. We've seen that there's improvement in kidnapping. They've shown so. They're also showing that maybe the amount of money that's outside the circulation and possibly in the hand of criminals is also reduced. Now, but the big one, the political big, if you like, ping pong here now, is the election. And the impression people have out there is that this will help us reduce. Essentially, we need to have, since we know that vote buying is actually a convention in Nigerian politics, less cash availability for trafficking, if you like, and trading.
Okay, one thing before you go, just before we round off this.
So essentially, don't compromise the objective, but be flexible enough to solve some of this crisis without necessarily. I won't like court-mandated or governance-mandated action.
Okay,
one thing. The central bank,
I'm bothered. I'm particularly bothered about depositors' confidence in these commercial banks. When all this is over, how can deposit money banks regain buy back the confidence of depositors?
I think that's actually one of the collateral damage of this process. That the notion that banks are either hoarding this cash, giving to people, not giving to other people, could affect general propensity to use the banks. But again, the problem is that central bank is moving to cashless in a first measure. So you have no option. But again, people will now select. It's now a case of choosing the winners. People are going to look at the banks. Who has been very much more disciplined, who has been more customer friendly, who has given us support, who has opened, who has given more cash who has not been involved in this crisis. So that may make a choice of people. You might say after this, people withdraw from banks. Some run on banks actually. Some banks are notorious, social media, and that's why central bank should step in now. There could be some viral attack on some banks for maybe stories around this, and that could lead to a run on those banks. In which case, the central bank has to also think around managing the social media landscape of this crisis, not just opposing to the election, but also how does this damage or restore confidence between banks and their consumers in terms of deposit and other banking services?
Thank you, Dr.
Balance is key, really, at the end of it all. Dr. Sam Amadi.